It's interesting, as you were mentioning that probably some of the seaweed gets exported over to Japan, where obviously they'd fetch a higher price for it. It's more prized. There's more of a sophisticated understanding. Yep. That reminds me of something I remember hearing about here in the UK, that a lot of Scottish langoustine get exported over to France, because in England we will eat them as scampi, right? They'll deep fry them and eat them as scampi, whereas in France...
The same thing happens in Ireland. Most of our lobsters, because we just literally don't appreciate them, or they catch a better price. But most of the lobsters in the west of Ireland go to France, and unfortunately the bigger langoustines as well, and they actually don't even land them. They get transferred boat to boat. So you're left with
this, because I've tried to make sense of this over years, like England, Ireland, both islands. Why? I get the whole thing of, I guess, victims of the fact that you have good fertile land, so didn't really need to draw off the sea. But why there just doesn't seem to be anywhere near the same degree of appreciation for seafood as there are in other, let's say, in Mediterranean or other European kind of coastal countries, or other parts of the world that are, like Japan being a brilliant example of it. But why do you think we don't have that?
I think there's a few reasons. I mean, one, and definitely goes back to the dawn of farming, and to a certain degree that's still in our psyche. And I think from I suppose from researching when I wrote the book, is that there's a shift inwards very much in Europe with the advent of farming. And I think it's the kind of the dependability on a crop that you can farm, and that you can plant and then manage, as opposed to when you go out to the sea, you might catch something, you mightn't catch something. You come back in. I think it's that lack of knowing. It's also, I think, and this happens down through the ages, is that for some bizarre reason, fishing and I suppose coastal living became associated with the poor. And it's if you had to pick your own food, and this is certainly the case in Ireland, and probably the case in England as well. And this bizarre tradition of that, if you had mussels and lobsters and shellfish, and they were all a food of the poor, as opposed to the riches of the sea, and that, and also because they couldn't travel that far inland, I think as well, is that really kind of was the nail in the coffin for stuff like lobsters or anything like that, until the advent of refrigeration and that. And so I think that's why
refrigeration was a big part of it, wasn't it? Thinking about the transport of seafood and stuff like that was probably, you're right, I guess, taking seafood inland. If you can grow fruit and veg, why would you transport seafood at the cost?
That's certainly an element. And it's certainly, I think it's certainly in Ireland in the 20th century, where we have this complete disregard of the sea as anything in terms of something that can give back. And I'm working on a fish book at the moment, because I had so many recipes left from the Irish Food Cookbook that were fish, and it was ironic that most of the recipes that didn't make the book were fish, because they were, God, you have a lot of fish, and I was like, well, it is an island. But they because it was an international book, it had to be the fish was only so big a section, so it had to be in there with all the other meat and that. So, but the more I look into it, and it's just there's various missed opportunities and various governmental policies that kept shifting us inwards, and kind of and really just focusing on the land and what the land can give. And because it takes time to build up resources to fish, or if you want to deep sea fish, all these things, they don't just happen in the same way where you can take a couple of cattle and put them in the field. There's a lot more technology at stake. So I think that to a certain degree was probably the downfall to some degree.